Welcome to the show today. I have a very special show. I've invited my friend Paul Stumpo on. Paul, how are you?
Oh, doing great today, Douglas. How is it going for you?
Well, it's going good because you asked me if we would have a chat about the recent talk I did on the heart, which is connected to the book that we have done on the heart called The Human Heart as a Supersensible Organ of Perception. And I thought, well, why not just record it? So many people will probably be interested in this. And when I've done presentations before on this topic, sometimes I feel quite inadequate at the end because the topic is so utterly profound. I'm not sure that it can be properly conveyed. So, to ask some questions, have a conversation about it would be a delight. So, thanks for asking
Excellent.
that this take place.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for making the time for this. There was a one note that we had prior to starting the recording was there's a book, and I have now homework. I will be reading the book and going back over these questions that I have. We're going to talk about today, as well as any further that come up. And I really appreciate taking the time. And um, several things happened for me while listening to this audio video. I was driving down to Florida at the time and listening to it. We had 20 hours of driving to do. And so I had plenty of time to listen to it multiple times. And just before reaching our destination in Florida, I finished it. And then the next day, I had this experience at the beach in which a dolphin passed by, which with the natives experience was non-typical. And so I took that as a meaning that there was something extraordinary going on, and I did look up what that meant, and we can talk about that later. But just to jump right into some of these questions and some comments that I had with regard to my experience around listening to what you were sharing. And so these aren't all directly focused on what I would consider maybe the core aspect, but they were comments and questions that had come up from myself and others. And so the first one was that you made mention that the Schumann wave was created by the rotation of the Earth. And that's the first time I had heard that. I know it's interrelated. The Schumann wave is interrelated to the circumference of the Earth because that's how we can calculate the 7.83 wavelength is based on the circumference, but that the actual rotation of the magnet or magnetic field created this wave. And so I thought perhaps to ask you a question around how specifically that wave is being created. Is it in a relationship to the magnetic field, to the rest of this, the universe's electric field or magnetic field? Is there any more that you can comment on that aspect?
Yes, to my understanding, the Schumann wave is created at the equator to make 7.83. And it is the friction that happens between the atmosphere and the surface of the Earth. It's basically what the Greeks would have called the interaction of Rhea, the Earth, with Uranus, the sky. And remember that most Aboriginal cultures believe in the sky god. And so when you're
Right.
talking about this
Yes.
interaction between Earth and sky, you're talking about an electrostatic reaction, but you're
Mm-hmm.
also talking about the exact frequency of the spin of the Earth. So why does the Earth spin at that frequency? Now, that is the bigger question.
Hmm.
As I pointed out, the heart is basically 7.83 or approximately 8 hertz is the
Mm-hmm.
frequency coming off the heart. Well, recently I did a talk on brain waves, and if you want to talk about the only real overlap that happens with brain waves, it's the overlap of alpha waves, which are dreaming waves that happen when you dream, and they go up to one end of the spectrum for them is 8 hertz. And then there's a subset of that called mu, and mu waves are between 8 to 11. And then there's a subset of delta waves called theta, and that is the very frequency that you want to get into if you're going to contact the spiritual world through meditation, through concentration exercises. When you go into prayer, that's the frequency that you actually attain in your brain. It's almost a dreamless sleep state, but it's not. It's right before that state. It doesn't go into 1 to 4 hertz. It goes 4 to 8 hertz. So that's theta. So when theta,
Okay.
mu, and alpha all are conjunct, that is the same frequency of the heart, and that is the same frequency of the spin of the earth. And that is really the frequency of the cosmos. And the reason the earth spins is because that's the frequency of the entire cosmos. And it is the frequency of the heart. And the heart is, as Rudolf Steiner said, if you take the heart and you turn it inside out, you have the cosmos, the universe. If you take the universe and you turn it outside in, you have the human heart. So it's no surprise that the center of your consciousness is in the heart, and that it is based upon the rhythms of breath, of course, and pulse of the heart. And that creates a 1-to-4 relationship when you're asleep. And that is a perfect relationship to have, because that's the relationship that puts you into theta and delta waves in your brain. And that is the healing frequency. So every night you're healing yourself through that very frequency that we would call the Schumann wave. But now let me just say that there's a lot of confusion around the Schumann wave, because 7.83 is what happens at the equator in the past. It is now sped up. And last I checked, the frequency of the Schumann wave is going higher. And if you go higher in latitude and you go to the North Pole, any of the higher latitudes or the lower latitudes to the South Pole, it changes, and it can become quite dramatic there, but that is not the same friction that you would have at the equator, which is what causes that exact frequency to basically be the frequency of life on the earth.
Okay, that's some deep thoughts there that I'm gonna have to chew on some more and probably have more questions about. So, one curious note. So the frequencies 1 to 4 is, you were saying, that is when you're in deep sleep, correct?
Yes, no dreaming, trance
No dreaming.
consciousness, basically.
And so the objective for meditative work is 4 to 8 hertz, or just before 7.83. Yes.
Yes, what they call theta. Yes.
So one interesting side note: while I was on the beach there, I just did a very non-scientific experiment on the timing of the waves that are washing on shore, and it's approximately just below every 4 seconds. And so not every wave was that, but I would say the average of the waves were close to 3.5 to 4 seconds. So you had talked also about the piezoelectric connection with the pulsation of the skull and the creation. I think you were talking about the creation of the carbon crystals in the brain, or was it the piezoelectric motion of the skull against the carbon crystals in the brain, or is it a combination of the two? You were creating them as well as using them to create a piezoelectric effect.
Yes, well, you use basically your what's called, we may get into this because I mentioned it. I should probably just state it. It's called the Sintamani tree. It's called the Ruri stone. And it's called the frontal spinal column, according to Blavatsky and to Rudolf Steiner. So there's a normal spinal column in the back, and there's one that's being developed in the front. When it is developed, you then use your heart forces to move up through your throat chakra, your brow chakra, to your crown chakra. And through the etherization of the blood, you extract carbon and use that to ionize oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and sulfur. And when you do that, calcium is transformed into calcium carbonate crystals that are then deposited in the pineal gland, and they are piezoelectric. The other two types of calcium that are deposited there are not healthy and do not create piezoelectric charges. So when the pineal gland stands upright, when the aqueduct that runs through it causes it to stand upright, it then has the ability to emit a piezoelectric charge through the third ventricle, which then charges the substances that fall down into the third ventricle from the first and second ventricle. And then that causes basically, well, technically it would be called a magnetohydrodynamic generator. That's when you have piezoelectric charge going through a fluid substance that's going across a magnetic gap. And that magnetic gap is caused by basically the midbrain and everything that's happening with the medulla oblongata and the hypothalamus, because that's where all sensing is of heat. And also, of course, the sensing of all the chemical substances in the body, particularly metals and minerals, which are in fact fire. You could consider them to be fire. So when piezoelectric charge comes from the pineal gland, charges up those particles that have been dropped from the first and second ventricle, they create in that fluid a glowing energy, and that goes forward, stimulates the pituitary gland, and pituitrin is excreted in the body, and that causes then the frontal spinal column to open. And it goes from the head to the heart. And once it's in coherence, then you have a fantastic, perfect resonance between the head and the heart. And remember that the chambers below the heart, the metabolic system, all are basically being sensed by the vagus nerve, which runs through the heart. So the whole lower, everything below the heart, the information, the sensing that happens is being sensed by the vagus nerve running directly through the heart, and then from the heart up to the brain, or from the brain to the heart. So that's so what your question is would be yes to both of those. It's happening both ways. Now the skull of the head, at the back of the skull, is actually opening, and it's creating what's called the etheric heart, and that's a whole other topic.
So the cranial bones, which are supposed to flex, right? That's the whole concept behind cranial sacral therapy, is to get those bones to flex appropriately and allow for the pushing or the conductance of the cranial sacral fluid down the spine, and then of course it's the sacrum pushes it back up to the head, and you have that pulsation there going on based on the flexing of the cranial bones. But you're adding to it that there's this piezoelectric effect energizing the minerals in these glands that are creating a light wave, a source of light energization of the body. And can you just describe that again? This energization of the minerals and this light that's being, you're calling them fire. They're being energized by this piezoelectric effect of the pulsing of the brain, and that's then going out into the rest of the body, or just into these specific glands?
Specifically into the third ventricle, which stimulates then the pituitary gland, and then that causes pituitrin to be excreted, and that is the lubricant for your nerves and for your cardiovascular system. It basically is the master gland to control those things. Now, when you talk about the pulsations to the brain, that comes through normal breathing, and the fact that your normal spinal cord has cerebral, it has through the discs, there's a connective expansion and contraction that happens with every breath, and that in fact creates a more or less a drum beat of your breath that goes into the ventricles of the brain. And so you are having a sounding effect, a vibration effect of breath and heartbeat through the spinal cord, the back spinal cord, into the head. And this is, of course, how many, that's why the pineal gland and the corpus quadrigemini, which has has 11 of the 12 cranial nerves going through it. It also feels this pulsing because it's at the back of the fourth ventricle. It can feel these things as they're coming up the spinal cord, and that would, of course, be what they call Kundalini. And this type of Kundalini energy, which is so misunderstood, is that is of the past. If we want to go into consciousness, that's the frontal spinal column, and that is the It's called the earthly and cosmic nutrition stream. So you can send from your heart, from your, literally from the foundation chakra of your back spinal column, you can cause the three channels, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, to merge as they cross the chakras. That will then release all kinds of energy going up your spine that would be called Kundalini. Now, that can be very, very dangerous because that is getting into your human willpower, which is a very unknown area. It's of the human being. We very little experience the human willpower. So anything below the heart is supposed to have been tamed in past incarnations. So if you don't have the fire in the belly and your chi in your chakra called the chi below 2 fingers below your belly button, then you're not going to have the energy to cook the carbon to create the earthly nutrition stream. So therefore, you're not going to get the cosmic nutrition stream. But if you can, and you raise it up, both using the frontal spinal column and the crossing over of the chakras, and the heart then becomes the center control for both the frontal and the back spinal column. But if you can do that, and you have enough fire in those areas below, and you've tamed your astral body, your desire body, your desires for gratification, sexual and otherwise, and if you have a good foundational chakra, if you there's a the Ascend diet Tyler created, because she's a doctor, a naturopathic doctor. She created the Ascend diet to get your first, second, third chakras aligned. Basically, you need to have good water, good air. You need to have a clean environment, which, that's what Paul does as one of the things, besides being a technical engineer and out in the industry. He also can come and tune up your house. And those are the ones that need to be done before these things I'm talking about.
Yes, I see that.
But if you can do that, and you can get to the point where you can reside your consciousness in your heart selflessly, then you can start to really basically cook up these substances that are in every breath that you take and turn them into higher substances, which then in fact create brain sand, which are these calcium carbonate crystals in your pineal gland. The more brain sand you have, the more bioelectric energy you're going to have in your head.
Okay. There's a couple of questions in there. I'll come back around to the major one. You a couple of times in the audio made a distinction between the bioelectric energy as opposed to electricity, which, of course, I think what you're referring to is like the AC that's in the wall, right? The 100 or 120, the 60 hertz, 120 volts that are in the wall, as opposed to bioelectric that's produced by this process by this piezoelectric process they're talking about, as well as there's the minerals that we ingest create an electric field across the cell membrane. And so there's a reason why you pointed at it twice, and I wanted to just make a comment on that. Is it because the AC that's in the wall is artificially created, and this is what you're talking about as far as bioelectric is coming out of the realm of the spirit and in the pulsation of the physical form, which is not happening on its own. The body is basically a bag of minerals and water, and without the animation of the spirit, it doesn't do anything on its own. And so can you just make a comment on that distinction between those two, bioelectric and electricity?
Well, ever since I was 12 years old and I started reading about how electrical energy is created in the human body, I've always known that scientists are full of superstition and nonsense. And so it has changed. There's never been a year that they didn't change from one year to the next and play like they didn't change the theory of bioelectric energy in the human body. Now they're going to tell you it's photonic energy. And so when you were saying before, asking questions about photonic energy, yes, every cell has the ability to produce blue light, a very, very low grade, very low luminescent uh, photonic energy, and all DNA has it. Almost all cells have it. Any living cell has that. Now, what is that? We were just talking about that the other day with my son. That's in the cell, that's the uptake of sodium, potassium, but it also takes a balance of iron, silica, magnesium, calcium, and other substances. Those are all metals and minerals. Well, if you take the human flow of blood, even before the heart starts to beat, the child in utero has a complete circulatory system, and it's active and it's working.
Mm.
It is not pumped by the heart. So if you take that system, even before the heart starts to beat, but once the heart starts to beat, you have a flowing system of what? Of fluids that are impregnated with metals. What's that going to create? Magnetism. And that's going to create a flow. It's going to create a field. And that field is not the same kind of field as a rotating magnet with copper on it is going to pull out of the luminescent ether, or actually out of all the ethers, and particularly the sound ether. That's where electricity comes from. When magnetism pulls down the music of the spheres, the harmony of the spheres, that creates man-made electromagnetic frequencies and energy that runs through our wires. I make a complete distinction between that and the bioelectric energy in the human body, which, as I say, I think I said this to you the other day, and you looked at me like I was crazy. When I was 12, that was called cybernetics.
Yes, I did look at you like you were crazy.
And you're like, what are you talking about? And then it has changed so many times, I cannot enumerate it for you. It is now in the heart called the process of HIS, H-I-S. And what happens in the heart is that across in your atrium, in both atriums, particularly in the right atrium, you have a sinoatrial node. It's no bigger than the fingernail on your thumb. And that's the reason that the ancients said there was a fire in your heart, in the atrium, and the fire was as big as your thumb. And they literally say the bigger your thumb, the stronger your willpower, the stronger the fire in your heart.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Okay. So I was taught through practices, POA practices, to extinguish that if I wanted to. And that's what the Tibetan monks do. They extinguish the fire going across what scientists now call the sinoatrial node. Well, what happens? The sinoatrial node is the blood is coming back, and it's now blue blood, and it's returning, and it goes across this gap. And because of the content of metals and minerals, that's the charge of bioelectric energy coming from the heart, which they now say, and every time they measure it, they find that it's bigger than they thought. And they'll tell you there's a torus field that extends 10, 15 feet out from your body that can now be measured with devices. You and my son, engineer, who's an engineer, we're talking about these devices. They can put it on wood and tell you the frequency that it's emitting. They can put, they can put a potential, they've been able to do this for decades, put a potential gradient reader inside of your field and tell if there's a charge there. But that charge is not the same. It is a direct current charge, first off.
Sure.
And magneto-hydrodynamic generators are direct current. When you run a gas or a fluid impregnated with heavy metals across a magnetic gap, you create direct current. Every single nuclear power plant in America has a magneto-hydrodynamic generator in a secret, top secret room. That's how they bring them online, because a nuclear power plant can't start from zero and build up.
Right.
It has to be synced in once the entire thing is running. That is an MHD. MHDs have been around since the 50s. That's what runs all the UFOs in the sky, okay, if they're human. That's what runs all these. They have these in atomic submarines. They have them to run aircraft carriers. You can have one tiny little magneto-hydrodynamic generator, and it can run an entire aircraft carrier. Now, the human body has that in the head, in the third ventricle, and it has it in the heart at that particular point in the atrium. So it reads the blood, and then that's what the heart, as a supersensible organ, knows every single thing that's going on with your blood and nerve, because the vagus nerve runs right through the sinoatrial node. One of the two branches of the vagus nerve go right through it. So one is receiving information coming up, the other one's receiving information coming down from particularly the brain. But one is from all the way from the metabolic system, as I mentioned, it's going up. So right there in the heart, at that one point, as big as the fingernail on your thumb, is the control device for the heart's bioelectric energy. That's 100% different than what happens with the cell and the uptake of. It's basically the same thing. It takes bases and acids, and when they run together across a sensitive point, and the cell is that sensitive point, the cell membrane is that sensitive point. When it has all these substances attacking it, it actually creates a charge, and then they choose which ones to take up, and those are, as you were pointing out, potassium and sodium uptake of the cell. That's a different type of energy. And the energy in your head, that's a different type of energy. So it is a magnetohydrodynamic generator, but it's not like the heart. And in the stomach, now this is my own theory. I believe that when you transform, well, as science will tell us, settled science, superstition science will tell us that nothing, no substance can change into another substance without fission, or either by fission or fusion. Fission is going to create an explosion. Fusion is what happens in the sun and transfers one element to another. I believe fusion happens in the heart, and I believe fission happens in your gut. And we destroy our food. That's what's happening. It's 100. It's cold fission, cold fusion, but not cold in that the heart is cold, in that it doesn't have to be the temperature of the sun, which they like to tell you it needs to be 10,000 degrees to make fusion work. No, it doesn't. There can be cold fusion, there be a cold fission. So the metabolic system has another power center. And that power center is basically what happens when you destroy the food that you put into yourself. At that moment, you 100% destroy it. And then you create out of nothingness. We do not use the nitrogen, oxygen, carbon. We don't use the elements that are in our food. We use that to destroy. We must destroy that. And then that gives us the energy to take the enzymes from the pancreas, the enzymes that we just extracted from the food as we were destroying it. And then we can build energy out of nothingness. Now, that is a secret that won't be known for quite a while. And I'm not going to get into, Rudolf Steiner revealed some secrets, but he also said, I can't reveal all the secrets. I can tell you about the fifth chamber of the heart, he said, but I can't tell you about the sixth and seventh chambers of the heart. Well, I put what the sixth and seventh chambers of the heart are in that book that you can get for free by going to Neoanthroposophy or to ourspirit.com, and you look up our bookshelf and you can get a free copy in a PDF form. That book has never been in a printed form, much to my chagrin, but it's we just haven't done it yet.
Right.
But basically, you have those three different types of energy going on, and they're distinctly different, and they do not move at the speed of electricity. They move with the speed of photonic energy now. And they couldn't understand. They always said, well, if electricity in the body is bioenergetic and is created by chemicals, and it cannot move at the speed of electromagnetism. True, it moves faster. It moves at photonic speeds.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was a deep discussion on that. I'm going to have to go back through and listen to it again, as I had in the past. I wanted to go back to this frontal spinal column discussion, because I think it's tying into, and you had mentioned in that framework of discussions about purifying or cleansing the three lower chakras. And as a discussion that we had some time ago, just to say it directly as I've become to understand it, and that is with the sexual energy, that without that grounded in like something, the term that I have had heard and now becoming aware of is called matrimonial love, or inside this context of this proper relationship. All of that energy that is surrounding that is in huge storm amounts in the world. All that energy goes to the Ahrimanic world, or to Ahriman, when it's not in its proper scope. And so part of my working and practicing, and actually some instructions that I've had from a pranic healer, to take that sexual energy and pull it up into the heart chakra, and to create warmth, and to create kindness, and to create love with it, and then ultimately pull it into the throat chakra and energize more mental activity and mental awareness, and then finally to the crown chakra and create a unity consciousness with the spiritual realm. These are practices I had been working on and you had this lecture that I've been studying over and over and over again. And to me, they started to blend together. And it's the whole activity that I was having with pulling this energy up into my heart chakra began to open up a consciousness that I think allowed me to really connect, or more effectively connect. I'm not going to say I've got to do, I certainly don't. More effectively connect to how I think, we had talked about it earlier, that because of your ability to understand this at the level that you do, and you're connected to your heart, and the part of the big aha in that whole lecture was understanding that the heart was imprinted with and captured and encapsulates the archetypal pattern of the universe, and of my karma, and of my potential life experience. Let's say it like that: potential life experience, that if I could connect to it in a deeper, more meaningful way, because pragmatically and in actuality, with my life experiences, it has been layered on with a whole bunch of junk, right? For all these years that I've been running around on the planet, I've accumulated and came in with and experienced a whole bunch of things that had layered on top of this. My karma, my heredity, my generational stuff that has come along through the familial ties, as well as my own life experiences, all kind of layer on top of that. And so going through a process, especially in the last 3 years, to explosively unlayer that, to get back to this foundational piece. And that's really what I heard on the trip driving down there, and then had this experience with seeing this dolphin fin, and realizing that was like energizing an awakeness and a transition in consciousness to a new dynamic, and how it was connected to this, that realizing or speculating that because of your abilities to connect to your heart in this manner, you're not just describing them pragmatically. It's like, this is something you've lived and are living. And that's what has allowed you to have this life that has exploded in all these different directions simultaneously, it seems at times.
Yeah,
and
exploded is a good description.
In multifaceted ways. And so that us other folks look at it and are kind of amazed by that, and rightly so. But I feel like, and we talked about it briefly earlier, and I wanted to just comment on it again, that because you're not just talking about this, but that you're actually fully experiencing the heart in this dynamic way, that it gives you the ability to perceive and to push through barriers that other folks couldn't possibly perceive to push through, including myself, to reach into areas that of life experiences that seem almost way out of reach to everyone, but yet there it is, written in the heart's structure. And all I need to do is really, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be your experience. It's not going to be your experience. It's going to be what I have contracted to come in to do, and yet not feeling like I fully have been doing it. And my perception is, because I don't have fully this connection to the heart, like you do. So I wanted to really just go over that again and hear you say what you said before and elaborate on that.
If you are acting out of your heart of hearts, the dolphins will come to you. I lived in Hawaii for years, and when I was down in Florida, whenever I went out, I'd call the dolphins with my heart, and they would show up. People who lived there for years had never even seen dolphins come near their boat, and pretty
Yeah.
soon I'm practically touching a dolphin off the edge of their boat. And because the person, I said, well, I'm calling the dolphins, they'll be here in a minute. And the person looks at me like I'm insane, my brother-in-law. And I said, no, they'll be here in a second. And so pretty soon he turns around and he sees me. I'm almost touching a dolphin who's coming up to the boat and swimming along with us. And there's a whole pod right there. And he's so excited that he's driving this motorboat, this kind of speedboat. And he turns to me, he goes, Doug, take the wheel. And he leaps up from the boat on top of the pod of dolphins. Of course, they all move aside so that he doesn't get to touch them. But he goes, "There's the I've been down here for 20 years. I've never seen the dolphins." And I'm like, yeah, well, you scared them away. They're not going to come back now. I mean, you tried to jump on top of them. How stupid could you be? So I was in Hawaii, and I used to lead people on tours because I could always get the dolphins and the whales to come. And they'd all say, how do you do this? Well, you have to ask with your heart of hearts, and you have to believe, and they will hear that. And I could tell you story after story after story. And when I learned that, it was before I took people on tours out there. And Joan, the dolphin lady, came, and we actually were able, between the two of us, to call the pods in anytime we wanted into Kealakekua Bay on the Big Island of Hawaii. And so eventually I got to the point that I'd take people out and I'd say, okay, just come near me, and we're going to swim out here and we're going to call the dolphins. The dolphins would come, swim, 30 feet underneath us in a circle, 6 of them. I remember one particular time. And then I'd say, okay, now from my heart of hearts, will you please breach for these people? And the dolphin comes right up at us, scares the heck out of everybody. They think the dolphin's coming after him. Jumps right out just 10 feet from us and flips around, and then they go, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever happened to me in my life. And so I could talk to the dolphins, and I'd go swimming with the whales. I'd go out swimming for 5 hours at a time and swim with the whales and be within touching, arm's distance from them. They'd come right up, even with their babies. And below that, 35, 40 feet below that would be hammerhead sharks, which everyone was terrified from. But if you wanted to talk to the whales, you had to go out in this particular bay, and no one swam out there because the sharks, there's so many sharks, all kinds of sharks. But I'd go out there, and the sharks never bothered me, and the whales would come. And so even from the land, I could call them with your heart of heart. Now, what is that? That means a conscious control of your rhythmic system to turn it into a communication device. That is what happens when you open up the frontal spinal column. But the whole thing you said before, the Tibetans believe there's only one chakra below the heart. All of the chakras have merged into one chakra, and it has 64 petals. And those 64 petals, this is going to sound crazy, are represented by Yabyum, the male and the female in union, in sexual union, 64 different positions. Once you've worked through these 64 positions, sex no longer can get your attention. Your sex chakra is tamed. But what else has to be tamed? It has to be, as you pointed out, your relations, your family. That's the chakra, your solar plexus chakra. If that's not tamed, forget it. You're not going to go onto the path of ascension. Not going to happen. If you have karma with somebody that you know that you have bad karma with them and you haven't resolved it, good luck. You're not going to get into the spiritual world with that. It's not going to happen. So you got the solar plexus chakra. That's usually where your whole family thing is, right? And it can be a mess. And until you've gone through years of working it through and going back and reliving it and forgiving them, taking the good, leaving the bad, forgiving them, you're not going to work through that chakra. We were supposed to have worked through all the lower chakras below the heart in the past. And so each chakra comes with half of the petals developed from the past, and half must be developed now. Well, the lower chakras, most of the petals are developed from the past. The problem is people want to develop it now and take their anger and their hatred towards their family or towards their nation or towards people further and kill them. So in the solar plexus chakra, You can't have a good heart if you want to go kill somebody because of what they did to you, or you hold a grudge against them from now forever. Okay, then you go below that to the pit of the stomach, to the chi, what's called the tumo, called the vase. It's called the chi. It's got 1,000 names. 2 fingers below your belly button, the pit of your stomach. That's where your real lower fire comes from. Why? Because it's sitting on top of your sex chakra, and your sex chakra is just pure fire, and you have to get that under control. But desire for the opposite sex for the sake of procreation couldn't be a better conception. But the real conception happens in your throat and with your head and your heart. That's the true conception. And in the future, we will conceive not via sex, because the moon will reunite with the earth in 6,000 years, and we won't any longer have male and female. We will literally use our voice to create through conception. Right now,
Sure.
what happens when you have a thought? It comes into full conception and into birth through being put into words. And then those words can affect somebody's heart.
Yes.
So the chi chakra, that's why people study yoga. That's why they study martial arts. That's why they, do all of this stuff to try to get their energy together. But if you're smoking cigarettes, if you're drinking coffee, if you're drinking sugar all the time, you're not ever going to get your chi together. It's just not going to happen.
Understood.
Because you've given it away to demons who are eating your energy. So you have to live a pure life before you can do this ascension work, and before the earth and cosmic nutrition stream, or what's called the etherization of the blood, can actually happen. So sex chakra, well, get it together. Look what's happening now in the world. That's all coming unglued because we're going across the threshold, and we're finding out that in the future, we're neither one sex or the other. So what do we see is the bounce back confusion of that is people then say, well, I'm going to mix up the sexes now, and it's going to everybody's going to be confused and dysphoria. Well, that's because you didn't understand that the great goddess was the great goddess because she was the goddess of birth, death, and rebirth. And if you don't understand, you're a co-creator for birth for a woman during the time from Menzies to Menarche, for a man right up to his last moment. But if you don't understand that you're a co-creator and that that's the greatest power that you have, and you misuse it, you can't ascend. And then, of course, the foundation chakra, that's being attacked from all directions by food, bad water, bad air, as I mentioned before, EMFs. All this is attacking you. So until you have the chakras below the heart, and isn't it strange that the Tibetans say there's one chakra and there's one stem? Well, what's that stem? The vagus nerve. And it comes up and it combines all the chakras into this beautiful 64. Well, 64 is a very magical number, and I can go into why it's 64. But the point is, you're not supposed to even think about that stuff. You're supposed to have resolved all that stuff. So if you don't love your neighbor as yourself, if you don't love yourself, if you don't love God, you cannot tame your lower chakras. But once you do, then you can start to move not up the back of your spine for a Kundalini burst of light in your head, which can happen, but that can happen when a healing minister at a church touches your head and you get the lightning flash. Well, that's the same exact thing. It's just a magnetic pulse that came out of that person's hands, both hands, cosmic and earthly magnetic pulse. Well, that can happen in 1,000 ways. Matter of fact, there's devices you can wear now, put on your head. It's called transdermal cranial direct current induction stimulation. I helped actually develop that many decades ago. And so you can do this through machines. But if you can't do it through your own development, then it's just simply not going to work. Now, I want to mention one other thing. And it was in the book, and it's something that is so strange. I'm sure that when I mentioned this last time, you probably thought, he's probably crazy, I mean, who let him out of the psych ward? The Sintamani tree grows from your heart to your head in front of you. You see it. It is the vagus nerve, but it also comes out as chakras. These are new chakras that are being developed, right? And it's called the Sintamani stone, or the wish-fulfilling stone. That's why to pray to Buddha, you say, Aum Mani Padme Hum, hail thou um, hail thou jewel in the heart of the lotus. And a jewel is the wish fulfilling jewel. What is that? That is really the beginning of the seed that grows into the Sintamani tree that grows, and it's the tree of life, and it grows from your heart to your head. It's also, if you go into almost any Oriental house in China and in North Korea and anywhere, Japan, the first thing you see is going to be their scroll of the ancestors, right? And sitting right next to it is going to be this strange.
Like we've lost Douglas for a second. You're back.
Oh, okay.
So it's going from the heart to the head.
Yeah. When you go into an Oriental person's house, generally they have their scroll of the ancestors because they worship the ancestors as well they should. We all do that through our DNA, whether we know it consciously or not. We are our ancestors in terms of heredity. But anyway, the ancestral scroll will be sitting, it might be in a box, but right next to it is going to be a strange device that most Americans never, ever notice. And hardly a single Oriental person can explain it to you because they don't even know what it is. And that's called a Rui stone, Ruyi. It's about this long. It can be made out of plastic. It can be made out of metal. It can be made out of 1,000 substances in 1,000 million different ways. But what it shows is a stone, and a stone. 3 stones on this thing called a Rui stone, but it's not a stone. And in some cases, they're not even stones. They're just jewels of some sort, shiny. What does that represent? It represents the 3 stones of your heart, your throat chakra, and your brow chakra. And it shows the frontal spinal column. They are showing you a frontal spinal column, which is the path of ascension to go back to the spiritual world where you came from, to contact the ancestors. That's what you need. And that's why it sits right next to the ancestral box, the ancestral scroll, is because that's, and the monks, Tibetan monks always have these, but they'll do funny things with them. And if you go to read about it, you hear that people trying to describe this and they call them back scratchers. So they'll take it and they'll scratch their back with it. They'll scratch their head with it and they'll hold it, right? I should have brought one up. I have one downstairs and it's completely brass and it has no stones in it, but it shows that it's the frontal spinal column because it's a dragon. And so this is the key factor to the heart is going to turn into a different organ in the future. And I described it turning from the cube into the dodecahedron in the book, as well as in the talk. But you might not want to go there. But the heart is going to change, and it's going to go from being a autonomic nervous function to a sympathetic nervous function. It will go from an autonomic organ to a sympathetic organ. In the future, we won't need the sinoatrial node to sense the blood returning. We'll be able to directly, with our consciousness, sense it. In the future, we'll be able to determine how much blood needs to go out, what areas need it, what areas need a better flow, what is it that your blood is telling you. The whole thing, we'll be able to use our heart as our higher organ of perception in every way. And it will, if you have Christ on the throne of your heart, literally your heart will become a communication device, a moral inspiration that is in direct contact with Christ's intuitive being. And so it's connecting your inspiration to your intuition through Christ, through your heart. And that's what the whole thing is. So the wish-fulfilling stone is held in your hand as a prayer at your heart. And what are you praying for? You're praying for your own immediate enlightenment so that you can help all other sentient beings attain their enlightenment. Well, what is that? That's the vow of the Bodhisattva. That is the mission that Christ has given us, to love God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do that, then your heart will become a sympathetic organ and not just one that, and it'll have great, what's called the flexibility of the heart to go between one speed and another is actually the way that they determine your health now. So when they're looking at,
Heart rate variability.
thank you so very much, when they're looking at heart rate variability, that can actually predict how long you're going to live and what organ is weak and what organ they would say will be the first one affected. Why? Because your heart is sensing that in utero before you're born. And so when they say that the person looks at the parents and that the angel of the person coming into incarnation sets the parents up to get together, and that then they'll say to the child later when there's a divorce, well, it's your fault. You saw this before you came in and you chose it, And so it's the way that the New Age materialistic, spiritual materialists blame it back on their child. But that is absolutely true. The child knows by looking at the axis of the heart, the tilt of the heart, the function of the heart, and the heart rate variability in utero. You can test a child in utero, and it will tell you the weaknesses of all the organs just by listening to the frequency of the heartbeat over 24 hours, analyzing it. And if there is a lack of variability, in other words, if your heart is stone cold and it doesn't beat, it doesn't crack open when you love, and your heart doesn't bleed when you see someone suffering, well, then you don't have much heart rate variability. But if you do, that's what extends your life. So also one other thing, the theta rate, the rate of the heart, 8 hertz. Theta and delta, a child up to age 5 can be in delta wave, in other words, in a trance consciousness and still be awake, still have beta waves going on. Well, that's the state you're supposed to get to. And isn't that what Christ said? Suffer the little children to come unto me. In your heart, you're supposed to be like a child. If you were like a child, the frequency of your heart would be the beautiful frequency of the universe, and you wouldn't be stressing it out all the time, and you'd be able to respond to people the way that it's supposed to happen. And you'd be able to touch your heart of hearts and call the dolphins and the whales.
Yes.
And eagles and all the kinds of other animals too. Okay.
Yes.
That's why St. Francis had such rapport with the animals.
Yes, I see that. I get it. Yeah. So along with all that, my observation comes with a thank you that you're. I'm finally kind of sort of getting this a little clearer, modeling in all these discussions. You're trying to model to me and to others a way for us to live and live connected to our hearts, and to and serve. Be here consciously moving in our higher capacities to fulfill our higher purposes, and not get stuck in the mud, in the weeds, and in the mire, and to give us a possibility to look past that. And so thank you for modeling that for us in all these discussions. I'm sure that's one layer of it, or possibly one layer of it. And so, like, just pragmatically, I know we have our own particular connection in that. So when you start talking, yesterday was a particularly difficult day for me with regard to ancestral ties. And so pragmatically, I see the work that I have, at the solar plexus chakra, and I've been aware of that through other healing modalities, that there's a block there that needs to be worked on. And so summing it up the way you have is very clear. That is my work. And true enough, there's no way to move forward with that staying as it is. It's not possible. It has to be redeemed. It has to be transformed, consumed with fire, as it were.
Yes, burn off the dross.
Yes.
The heart is a forge, and we have to pound the lower chakras on the forge of the heart until nothing's left but gold.
Oh, that's a great way to summarize it, and to bring me to a concluding spot. I don't have any further questions at this time, other than a mental note that I have to go read a book.
Well, the great thing about that book is I stole all the best from everybody.
Oh, good.
And then, my phrase, my motto is steal from the best and make up the rest. because it's out there. This has been out there for 10,000
Mm.
years. This has been known intimately by the ancients and the natural clairvoyants. And as I've said in that broadcast, probably said, when I was pulled into the heart studies with Ralph Marinelli, John Barnwell, and Branko First, and all those people, I'd go, and because I was naive, because I had beginner's mind, I literally said to them, "There's not two beats to the heart. There's three, and I think there's a fourth." And they're like, "You're a nutcase, dude." I said, "No, no, no, no. Let me play with your Doppler here. Let me move," because we had a heart. We were looking at an active heart and doing a Doppler on it. And I said, "This Doppler is bouncing off an echo here. Turn around here like this, and boom, bang, swish, swish, swish." They saw three. And I said, "There's a fourth, but I just don't know where to put this Doppler to make it sound." Finally, they found the fourth. Now they know there's 4 vortex rings in the heart, one in each atrium, one in each ventricle. And they're like, when a dolphin blows a bubble, you've seen them blow those bubbles underwater,
Yes.
where they're so solid and they just stay and they just keep going and they keep going, they keep going. That's because they don't know exactly how to blow very, very powerfully and in a very tiny area. And then it causes this vortex ring to happen, right? It's like a smoke ring. People can blow smoke rings, but the dolphins do it better. So there's 4 of those. Each, they're a different frequency. And when those frequencies go off, you have a heart attack. That's why you have a heart attack. Because let's say you had some blocked arteries, okay? Well, then the return blood, or the blood going out, the arterial and the venous blood, one way or the other, might be blocked. So that sino-arterial atrial node senses that, right? And then makes certain adjustments. So your heart can do miraculous things far beyond anything that you can imagine. Rudolf Steiner pointed out there was a 5th chamber that's called the cardiac sac, or the what is it called? The pericardium. And then there's these 2 wings that open up on the atrium. So eventually, when you have sympathetic control of your heart, you'll be able to open the cochlea, or cochlea. It's just like the sound of the one in the ear. And they open up, and when they open up, they look like wings on the heart, right? And so when those open up, what's going to happen? You're going to have a greater capacity for the heart. Well, what's your heart? Your heart is your consciousness. So what could possibly give you a better perception of your body than to have 2 other chambers, the 6th and 7th chamber, as Rudolf Steiner called them, develop in the future? And what are those? They're called the wings. All the way back to Egyptian times, they showed the heart with wings, and so do the Sufis, so do all the natural clairvoyants. They all say the heart has wings, but they're not developed yet. You talk to a heart doctor about this, they don't even know they exist. You talk to a heart doctor, they don't even know that there's vortex rings in the heart. Well, this was discovered years ago. We discovered this, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, whatever it's been. But it doesn't get out into the public. And now the medicines, the enzymes that are found in the cardiac sac, the pericardium, they now find out appear only after you have a heart attack, and that those enzymes can cure people. They say the heart can't be repaired. The heart certainly can be repaired, and the heart sac is the control mechanism. Whatever your heart does, it produces its own cure in the pericardium. Go figure. An organ that produces its own cures. They're not there beforehand. They don't know how the heart creates them. And so the heart is also a gland. Now, if you take the heart and you stretch it out, it's just this fibrous thing that is real long. It's quite long. It's like, I don't know, maybe 3 feet long. But if you take it and you twist it into a figure 8, and somehow you make it look like a Mobius curve, and then you turn it, and then you connect it to the 23.5 degree axis of the Earth, you have basically a figure 8, a lemniscatory. You have a lemniscate that is a Mobius curve that is aligned with the Schumann wave, the frequency of the earth, and also aligned with the cosmos, but also aligned with all the elements so that it can take the elements and turn them into direct current energy. It can turn them into consciousness. It can turn them into photonic energy. It can create its own medicines to heal itself. There is no end to what the heart will become, because, as Rudolf Steiner said, if you take the heart and you turn it inside out, you have the cosmos. If you take the cosmos, you turn it outside in, you have the human heart. It's all there. So, Paul, I want to thank you for bringing these questions and for bringing your wonderful insight that you always have in these type of conversations to bear upon the human heart. And yes, we'll have to continue this. We've said we were going to do more conversations, particularly when you come with these questions, because it makes me have to be able to articulate it. And sometimes I'm only spurred on to do that by a good question. So to have all the answers in the world is nothing compared to one good question. So thank you so very much. And will you agree we'll do some more of this?
Oh, yes. Excellent idea. And thank you for your time. I can see, or I'm getting the impression that one of the main aspects of these discussions is for me to bring this into my conscious awareness and to consciously begin to work with them, these energy forces within the heart. And so understanding these structures, or at least understanding that these structures exist, maybe not fully understanding them, but understanding that they exist, to allow myself to reach further into them and to more fully consciously work with their activities. Thank you.
Most of the things I've said today are found in this book also. I forgot that, as well as the book on the heart. Now, how can people get in contact with you if, as I call you, the doctor of vibration, if they want to get the literally using devices that are tested by psychics and they're very effective, if someone wanted to get their house tuned up or even their car? You tuned up my son's Tesla the other day, and we're all like, whoa, instantaneously.
Yes, it was good.
It was like, it was like a burning fire, and you plugged in this device and it chilled out and felt delicious. It felt delightful. How could that happen? Just like that. That's what the kind of stuff Paul does. So how can people contact you, Paul?
Well, I saw they can go to basicstowellness.com, and I have an email there, info@basicstowellness, and a phone number that they can call. And either way is a good way to get a hold of me. I'm happy and in gratitude to be a conduit for people to experience those types of transitions, and as best I can to serve them. So thank you again for your time and for this opportunity. It's been extraordinary.
And you're the best person I know at doing this, by the way. And I know a lot of people. I've never seen anyone work a pendulum better than you, except for Robert Gilbert. That's high praise.
And that is high praise, because I think Robert is extraordinary.
So he's extraordinary. He's a one of a kind on the earth.
Yes.
I love that guy. And so thanks again. We'll do this soon. And all I can say is, bless your heart.
Yes, thank you. Bless you as well.